So hello, I'm Patrick Mann, a London artist and a volunteer with UpwithART 2021, London's arty party and silent auction in support of Unity Project for Relief of Homelessness and also Museum London. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion, which is entitled Looking for Courage and Finding Encouragement, Art, Culture, and Homelessness Relief During COVID-19. And now it's an honor to turn things over to our host, Rebecca Zandbergen from CBC Radio London, to get things underway. Rebecca?
Thank you very much, Patrick. So as you heard, yes, I host CBC Radio's morning show. It's called London Morning on 93.5 FM, just a little bit of a plug. Hopefully you can tune in. But I am here today to host this panel discussion called Looking for Courage and Finding Encouragement, Art, Culture, and Homelessness Relief During COVID-19. Let me introduce our panelists today. We have three guests with us. Chuck Lazenby is the Executive Director of London's Unity Project. It provides emergency shelter and supportive housing for people 18 and over. Now, I've had the pleasure of interviewing Chuck a number of times, and she's an incredibly passionate advocate who will stop you dead in your tracks with some of the stories she shares from her frontline experience. So please welcome Chuck this morning. We also have Brian Meehan, the Executive Director and Chief Curator of Museum London. The museum, of course, is a centerpiece in downtown London, an organization that has had to adapt greatly over the last year. So please welcome Brian. And you've already met Patrick, an artist and visual arts professor here at Western University. And he's here to talk about the artist perspective during the last year. So please welcome Patrick as well. So we'll open it up by giving everyone a chance to sort of talk about their organization and what they've been doing in the last year and how they've had to make significant changes. So Chuck, we'll start with you and the Unity Project. What do you want to tell us about your organization and the ways in which you've had to adapt?
Yeah, so Unity Project, we primarily run emergency shelter, supportive housing, and related kind of supports to folks experiencing homelessness in London. And our goal when we work with people is to support their immediate needs, intervene on whatever kind of crisis might be happening in the moment, connect with community resources, and work with people on the goal to get housing in the community and help them to maintain that. A lot's changed for us during the pandemic, but our primary piece that's been significant for us is we've been displaced from our home. And so due to physical distancing and to be able to keep people healthy during the time of the pandemic, we've shifted our emergency shelter operations to operating out of a hotel. And so we have 50 rooms in a hotel and work with folks in the same manner we did in our old location, but yeah, just in an entirely different facility.
Okay, we'll talk more about that in a moment. But Brian, tell me a little bit about what's changed at Museum London. I mean, aside from opening and closing and never knowing what's next, how would you describe the last year?
Yeah, it's been quite a year, a very confusing year. You know, like everyone else, you know, we spent the year trying to figure things out as we went along. You know, like most people, I think we met last March. We were thinking we're, you know, in this for, you know, at least 2 weeks, if not longer. And so as it became obvious that this was going to be a longer term situation, I mean, first and foremost, we had to look for support, and we're able to get the support from the federal government through the wage subsidy program as the first step so that we could actually keep staff on. I sort of hate to think of what would have happened with the museum and everything that we do if we weren't able to access that program. So that was the first thing that sort of changed for us, was we were able to keep staff on, but have them work from home, which was a learning curve, steep learning curve for people. And then we had to see how we went about bringing what we did online. And, you know, we really didn't have people on staff who had a lot of experience with that. So it was a lot of experimentation and trying to do as much as we did in person for the public, but deliver it through our website. And so we've continued to do that over the year. And as we've opened and closed and opened and closed, it's sort of been a pretty strong complement to what we present to the public in person.
Okay. And Patrick, for you, I know you're at the university, which I imagine has also looked quite a bit different over the last year, but you're an artist yourself. This, of course, is Up with Art, and we're talking about artists and their contribution to the community. So what would you say about how your last year has changed, and at the university as well?
Well, I'll say a little bit about the university for starters, and certainly I think that needing to do a lot more of what we do online, and also trying to be much more conscious of the day-to-day sort of emotional well-being of our whole community, including and especially the students, has been primary. I would say that that then extends to my experience in the art context, but I will say that, because my own livelihood isn't dependent on my art as much as it is for many artists, I think my experience has been somewhat different. I would want to say that, there's a couple of things that I think artists are experiencing. One would be, because we rely so heavily on community to support and really be sort of champions for what we do, and also community as a way to access opportunities. I think because that has changed and gone online so much, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty for artists. And so I think that goes to income. Are there exhibitions for artists where they'll sell their work, or are there public gallery exhibitions where they might get an artist fee? Those kinds of things are basic. But I also think that artists are fundamentally often self-employed, like so many people who are affected during COVID. And so some of the things that they would be doing on the day-to-day, whether even doing some technical support for other more mature artists or artists who have opportunities, even if they don't, those things have, if not disappeared, they've really, really changed. I mean, there's many good things. We have more kind of interesting online activity and online exhibitions for artists that I could talk about. But I would say that at this point, it has been primarily a really challenging time for artists.
Mm-hmm. You talk about, Patrick, sort of the ways in which a community needs to come together to support the wider community and the people within that community. And I'm wondering, Chuck, with this pandemic, the community at large has really struggled, and people keep talking about how it's really opened up our eyes to see the disparity that exists in each community. And just talk to us a little bit about what you have seen, the ways in which people who might be struggling with drug addiction or homelessness, or who are facing challenges that maybe some of us don't quite understand, how are they affected significantly during this pandemic?
Yeah, first, one of the things I will say is I think this time has shown more than any time that I can recall what the inequities of our system actually are, and to a broader population, for people to actually understand what it's like to, be on a very fixed or limited income, or not knowing what their income looks like from day to day, access to services being limited. And so there is, I think a lot of awareness in a way that people haven't quite had before. But I do think the primary thing that, we need to make sure we stay focused on beyond this pandemic is we have an overdose crisis in our community, and across Canada, and overdose deaths have increased exponentially from opioids as well as stimulants. And we need to respond to that as the health crisis it is, which the pandemic has taught us that we know how to do that if it's something that we prioritize. And so I think that when we are looking at people experiencing homelessness through this time, the access to services has been even more limited than it is for the rest of us, that people are isolated in ways that is actually, putting their lives at risk. And so that's been really difficult, for us to contend with, is to have already been in this health crisis that often the broader community doesn't want to pay attention to, and then to add on top of that the pandemic. And it's really taken a toll on the people we provide service to and the people who are working in the community as well.
Chuck, just on that, you talk about, homelessness and the overdose crisis, because we have seen the city step up to sort of fill some of the gaps around homelessness, but I don't know if we've seen the gap filled on treatment or options that are available so that they can use cleanly and safely. There are many initiatives in the city, but I don't know if they cover all the bases. So I'm wondering, where do you see the gaps? Like, acknowledging that the city has been making great strides, where do we still see the gaps?
Well, I think that we're always going to have gaps as long as we treat substance use like a moral or ethical issue. We need to see it as a health issue and address it in a comprehensive way, which means making options available to people. There's no one thing that works for everyone who might be struggling with the substances they use. And we certainly have seen programs in the city, from the overdose prevention site to safer supply of prescription drugs actually help during this time. But it's still not broad enough. There's still not enough resources dedicated to it. And I think that we really need to act on the idea of ensuring a safer supply of substances for folks, so that the toxicity of the street drugs is not killing people. And I think people are really afraid of this for some reason. And I think we need to remember that we regulate some of the most damaging drugs on a regular basis, which is alcohol and nicotine, right? We know how to do this. We know how to actually, allow people to use their substance of choice in a safer way. And so I'm really hopeful that we can see, a greater strategy applied more broadly for this.
I just want to talk, Brian, to you a little bit about the wider community and the ways in which you offer programs and services for people in the community who may not otherwise be able to afford to go to the museum. But I know there used to be that you could go with your parent as a child and do painting and sort of neat activities like that pre-pandemic that sort of opened the door to arts and culture that they may not otherwise get to see. And how has it been tough to sort of be able to offer those services to a wider community, to those who may otherwise not have that exposure during a time when we're online, which of course is a privileged place to be?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge, and that's one of the things that we've always kind of attempted to do, is make our programming accessible to everyone in the community, no matter what their economic circumstances were. So we have subsidy programs for kids who want to take summer camps and classes. Admission to the museum is free, so anyone can come to the museum to see the exhibitions. But yeah, when you change that to an online situation, first, I mean, the people have to have either a computer at home with internet access, or they would have to go to a library or some other place to get that. And of course, there's the supplies that come with it. I mean, we have a program called Imagination Station, which pre-COVID was a drop-in for families on Sunday afternoon, free for everyone, and all the materials obviously supplied for the activities. So with going online, obviously the people who want to participate either have to have their own materials already, or have to have a way that they can access those. We did work with ANOVA for some of our activities, where we got materials to them, and then they could distribute them to families that they felt could benefit from it. But that's pretty limited and pretty targeted, whereas pre-pandemic, anyone could drop into the museum, and it was a program that was really well received and well used. I mean, there were Sunday afternoons where we might have over 100 or over 100 people in the space, and we would have families returning week after week after week, because it was something that they could do together, they could afford to do, and it was really a creative activity, and they can make an afternoon of it. So that has been a real challenge, to find a way to reach those people in a way that allows them to continue to participate.
Patrick, from the artist experience, we often hear about, it's, kind of a glib thing to say, but the starving artist, because they're, it's difficult to make a career of being an artist, particularly I would imagine during a pandemic. But it is something that is very, I think, part of their blood to make art, to create, especially I would think during these trying times. And I'm wondering, where have you found that balance between creating art for the sake of thriving mentally versus trying to live through a time when you're, challenged to make any kind of money at all making art? So how have you found your colleagues, your friends in the community coping through all of this?
Well, for myself, I'm actually in a shared studio of 7 other artists, and we all have our own kind of designated space. This is in the Western Fair District. And I have found that certainly people are there more. I mean, in part, they're, some of my colleagues there, one teaches with Fanshawe, a couple of other teach with Western, because we're teaching online. In some cases, people are teaching from their studios. And so there is a sense that their work has become even more of a mainstay and a kind of a centerpiece of their lives. And I would include myself in that regard too. Certainly, I think we're still making our work. And even though some of the exhibitions that we're planning are, they are on hold, that kind of thing, there's still that way in which the making of the work has to be central. Certainly you want to exhibit your work, and absolutely, people do need to sell their work, but making the work is fundamentally, as you allude, it's sort of how we keep ourselves going in all the ways. I do think too, I've been impressed certainly with Museum London and with a number of the organizations in town, including TAP. They have artist residencies, and they've kept that program going as best they can. And certainly a younger artist, Sharmise Thakar, who's from India, who came to study at Western and now is in the community, she was accepted into their program. She has to sort of go on hold until they can reopen. But I think there's a sense that really organizations are planning for the future, as are artists. And part of the way we do that is by making our work.
Chuck, you talked a little bit about this awareness that this idea that the pandemic has really laid bare the inequalities, and people are more aware of it. But I wonder, it is largely, although probably not fairly, considered a downtown problem and an Old East Village problem, or an issue, something to consider and to deal with. But I'm wondering, for people who never come downtown, especially now that people are working more from home, do people care? I mean, do people who are living out in Byron or living in the suburbs and don't have any reason to look at the streets in the same way that you would, do they have a good sense, do you think?
I think there's a difference between do people care, where the answer is absolutely, to do people understand? So I think that there is definitely a lack of understanding of what one causes homelessness and poverty. The idea that it's an individual's fault, when primarily it's actually the system we've built poorly. I think it's difficult for some folks to understand what it is like to live check to check, or not even get a check, or have a check that doesn't actually cover your basic needs. And so I think that there is that general sense of caring and a general sense of understanding of what it would be like to struggle. But the real day-to-day kind of realities that people are facing, we're only scratching the surface in terms of understanding. We need to do a lot of work there in terms of, getting the general public to really, I think, understand the issues so they can get behind change. Mm-hmm.
I want to give you all sort of an opportunity to talk a little bit about the commitment from community and what it means to keep your organizations going and your community going, and sort of make your pitch as to why they might want to participate in Up With Art this year and contribute in some way. So Brian, I'll start with you and Museum London. What would you want to tell the listeners, the viewers right now, as to why they should participate?
Well, I really believe in the mandates and the work that both organizations do, and also just really believe strongly in the arts community in London. And I mean, we've historically sort of punched above our weight in terms of the the caliber of the community, and that continues. And anybody looking at the Up With Art website will see just the sort of the wealth of talent that's in this community. But at this particular time, as Patrick was talking about, I mean, there's a real need from the artist side of things for support. And it's one thing that I don't think gets talked about that much, but as much as artists support Up With Art in an amazing way, we've always maintained that artists should be compensated for their participation as well. So the artists are given the opportunity to receive up to 50% of the value of the work, or the price realized for the work, or a tax receipt for the fair market value. So when you're supporting Unity Project and Museum London through a purchase of a work, you're also supporting those artists. And I think, you know, for many people, starting a relationship with those artists and with the community. I mean, one of the great things about collecting artists is you're not, you know, buying a product, you're buying a creation from an individual. And often, you know, over time, you know, in the good old days when we would have a physical event, you could meet the artist and you can talk about the work that you're interested in, and you know, we will get back to that. But it is much more than just making a purchase. It's starting a relationship.
Yeah, and there's something about having a piece of local art on your wall that you have a connection to, and you know who the artist is. It's an amazing thing. And Patrick, that's something you know about. So just tell me a little bit about, you know, at this time when artists are sort of scraping by, trying to find ways to find some income. Why is an event like this important for artists in the city?
Well, I think, as Brian has said, it certainly is part of a way many of the artists will have some income this year. And so that's, I think, key. But, you know, it's also, I think, really important to recognize that the artists want to participate and really contribute to the community, and that includes Unity Project. And so what I mean is that oftentimes artists aren't people with high incomes that can be donating to various charities and organizations on an ongoing basis. But this is one really significant way they can not only make a contribution to Unity Project, but also be recognized as citizens in the way that we're all citizens. And I think that's really key. I think there's a sense in which the artists recognize, for the most part, that their lives are quite different than the community that is served by Unity Project. And at the same time that, you know, we're all part of a community, and they're doing their job. And alongside that, they would like to be able to participate in supporting others doing their job. And certainly I think we recognize that, you know, our work is important to the museum, for example, and the museum's important to us. So there's lots of reciprocal relationships that I think get played out in really important ways through Up With Art that, you know, I think artists really, really value.
And Chuck, just the last word to you then, to have art sort of contribute to the ways in which your organization can operate. What does that mean to you, and to have the community, that community maybe in particular, reaching out and helping out in that way? What, and for people who are looking to purchase art perhaps as a fundraiser, what would you say to them?
I think that one is, you know, organizations like Museum London and Unity Project, we rely on the community support. And that's certainly also reflected, as we've said, you know, in the artists as well who are selling their works. But we are absolutely reliant on the community to support us. And we don't want to just, you know, take your money. We want to build a community around this issue. We need people to be involved locally, to be interested locally in the issues that are happening. And Up With Art has really, I think, successfully brought different people together around these issues. And I think that is Up With Art's real strength, is having a diversity of people interested in the arts, and then learning about poverty and homelessness, and, you know, making this community a better place.
Okay, Chuck Lazenby with the Unity Project, and Brian Meehan with the Museum London, and of course to Patrick Mann with Western University, a visual artist. Thank you all for participating, and people can get bidding on their art now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening in on this important conversation with CBC Radio 1 London Morning Show host Rebecca Zandbergen and our panelists Chuck Lazenby, Brian Meehan, and Patrick Mann. Thank you all. And now let's return to our Up with Art silent art auction, shall we? Where you can bid now, buy it now, and donate money now, all in support of Unity Project for Relief of Homelessness and Museum London. Thank you.